Buongiorno! In this video, we'll look at why reflexive verbs are difficult for native English speakers especially, and we'll give you some tips and tricks to make them easier for you. So, in my previous video, I have explained what reflexive verbs are and how to conjugate them. So if you haven't studied yet the reflexive verbs, please have a look at this video before continuing. Otherwise, let's go on. So the concept of a reflexive verb is easy to understand. It is an action done onto oneself, such as io mi lavo, I wash myself. It exists in the English language, and it is also easy to conjugate in Italian. So, why is it that these verbs cause so much trouble for my students? Well, the reason for the confusion is that there is no direct correspondence between the Italian reflexive verbs and the English version. In other words, a verb that is reflexive in Italian not necessarily is conjugated as reflexive in English and vice versa. Let me give you a few examples. Lui si rade al mattino. This is he shaves in the morning. So you can see that in Italian, the reflexive pronoun is always expressed. But in English, this is not always the case, especially if the pronoun is obvious. So lui si rade means he shaves himself. But in English, you say he shaves, and that's it, because the pronoun is obvious and you don't need to say it. Moreover, another source of confusion is when in one language we use a reflexive verb and in the other a complete different structure. Let me give you some examples. In Italian, we say Lisa si veste. Literally, Lisa dresses herself, but it is so much more common to hear Lina gets dressed. Another example is Leo si lava. So literally, Leo washes himself. However, in English, you are more likely to hear Leo has a wash or Leo takes a shower. And now let me show you an example starting from the English language. For example, I drove myself to the party. Okay, this sentence cannot be translated with a reflexive verb in Italian. You are more likely to hear sono andata alla festa con la mia macchina. In Italian, there are various categories of verbs that conjugate like reflexive verbs, but do not have a reflexive meaning. And I'll give you some examples. Mi taglio le unghie, which is I cut my nails. Or mi preparo la cena, which means I prepare my dinner. Or another one, si abbracciano, which is they hug each other. And therefore, the question is, how do we solve the confusion and make reflexive verbs easy to use? So let's start at complete beginner level. At beginner level, I'll start by learning the 4 or 5 verbs that belong to the classic context of the routine. Okay, so this is what, in fact, most course books actually start with, and it is a great idea. So just start with those few and then build slowly but surely, including more. Start with learning these ones first. Svegliarsi, to wake up. Alzarsi, to get up. Lavarsi, to wash oneself. O farsi la doccia, to take a shower. And the last one, vestirsi, to dress. So what happened next? After you've mastered these 5 verbs and you've mastered the conjugation, so you know that you have to include the pronoun, you know the position of the pronoun, and so on, then it's time to include more verbs into your repertoire. To help you, I have compiled 3 tables of reflexive verbs, one for beginners, one for intermediates, and one for advanced students. They are included in my free mini guide. In this guide, you'll not only find explanations on what reflexive verbs are and how to conjugate them, but also more details on other types of verbs that looks reflexive but are not. For example, what we called riflessivi apparenti and also pronominal verbs. The guide includes lots of tables and much more. Find the link to download this guide in the description and leave all your doubts behind and achieve confidence with your reflexive verbs. Arrivederci.